Okay. Okay, let's get it started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for being here for our roundtable on multi-species oppression and health. My name is Jean. I'm a PhD candidate in environmental policy at Wageningen University, where I study wild animal farming in China's post-COVID food system. I'm really glad to be chairing today's discussion, and I hope it brings fresh ideas and perspectives for all of us. So we're joined by two fantastic speakers, Eva Meisha and Christopher Sebastian, whose insights will enrich our conversation. So here's the plan. Each speaker will share their thoughts, followed by a dialogue between them, and then we'll open the floor for your questions. I encourage everyone to join in and make the most of this opportunity. So first, let me introduce Eva. Eva is the organizer of the series and also an accomplished philosopher, visual artist, writer, and singer-songwriter. They're known for their thought-provoking novels, philosophical essays, and academic work, which span multiple genres and have been translated into over 20 languages. Eva's work examines profound themes such as language, silence, madness, non-human animals, and politics. Currently, they're a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Amsterdam and contribute essays and columns to NRC newspaper. They're also a member of the Multispecies Collective. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jin. Thanks a lot for chairing this session. So my talk will be called Long COVID Through a Multi-Species Lens. And in this brief talk, I want to explore the multi-species element of long COVID by sketching three sets of interconnections between long COVID and long COVID patients on the one hand, and more than human beings on the other. And I will focus specifically on non-human animals. So these connections are material connections, phenomenological connections, and connections concerning a lack of political voice. This is a phenomenological exploration, which is based on my own experience of being ill. And it's the beginning of my research rather than a fully formed paper. So my aim is not to present a really a strong argument, but rather to share my thoughts on this topic with you as a starting point for conversation. So the first set of connections that I want to discuss are the material connections. When the COVID pandemic broke out, there was a brief moment of attention for multi-species health and the manifold relations between nature, the more than human world, and illness, human illness, non-human illness. As you all know, COVID-19 is a zoonosis, which is a disease that spreads between human and non-human animals. Zoonoses connect humans and other animals on the level of the body, but they are also connected in other ways through the animal industrial complex and the climate crisis. These are cultural and political connections. So humans destroy the more than human world for animal food. Think, for example, of deforestation in the Amazon for farming soy to feed non-human animals in Dutch intensive animal agriculture. The Netherlands are actually the second biggest importer of soy from Brazil, which gives viruses more opportunity to spread. Think also of keeping too many animals in a small place, like a barn, which does the same, makes it very easy for a virus to spring from one individual to another. And I want to note that long COVID is not the only condition in which these relations are apparent. The same is, for example, true of Q fever. Another similar illness, chronic Lyme disease, is, according to the RIVM, on the rise in the Netherlands due to warmer temperatures following from the climate crisis. Other animals also get new illnesses because of human exploitation of their habitats and their bodies. Think of outbreaks and mutations of bird flu. And all of these points obviously require more attention than I have today. I just want to note that there are many interconnections between these conditions and the larger, more than human environment. And I also want to point out that these connections are not simply an empirical given, but follow from a political reality in which humans exploit beings of other species for financial gain, and also members of their own species. More precisely, a select group of rich and powerful humans destroy the ecological balance on which the health of everyone depends. The second set of connections that I want to discuss are phenomenological. When I was ill with long COVID, I kept thinking about the non-human animals, and mostly about those who are forced to spend their lives in captivity, in industrial farming, in laboratories, invisible to the world. This is not an exception for me because I'm always thinking about them, but I felt that I understood their experience in a new way. I thought a lot about captivity, stagnation, and physical suffering in this regard. There are, of course, many differences between the captivity of non-human animals in industrial farming, laboratories, households, zoos, and other spaces, and that of humans suffering from long COVID. In the case of these other animals, humans hold them captive and control their movements, while with long COVID, it's the disease. But still, through being ill, I could catch a glimpse of what it means not to be free, because with long COVID, you are a prisoner of your body or perhaps of the disease. And as patients know well, one of the worst symptoms of long COVID and similar conditions is PEM, post-exertional malaise. So cognitive, emotional, and physical activities like taking a shower, making a phone call, or reading a book make you sick. So you need to avoid them. This leads to a loss of freedom, and it also leads to a loss of self. Humans with long COVID cannot flourish as the kind of beings they are. You lose that what makes you you, like thinking, feeling, speaking, walking, working, caring. You lose the ability to love. And because of the nature of the disease, you cannot rebuild yourself. So you're kind of stuck in the ruins of the person that you once were. And this is obviously also true for non-human animals in captivity. They suffer from not being able to express themselves, build up a life, and they cannot flourish as the kind of beings that they are, sometimes to an extreme extent, like in industrial farming. Intertwined with this captivity is the experience of stagnation. You become isolated, not just in space, but also in time. With long COVID, you cannot really have new experiences or experiences at all, except from the experience of being ill. You can't even escape in books or films, or to a very limited degree. I'm a person who likes to be alone, and in the first 6 months or so, limited contact with other humans was fine for me. But after that, the social isolation, lack of movement, lack of expression, also contributed to losing this sense of self. And this experience of stagnation is also present for other animals in captivity. They live in the same everlasting now that keeps repeating itself, and they're also not capable of changing it. This leads for these other animals to boredom, self-harm, harming others. Think of pigs who eat the tails of others. Think of salmons in fish farms who choose to die by stopping eating. And of course, not all of these animals are socially isolated. Some suffer from the opposite. They have lack of space and can't get away from others. But all of them cannot choose their social life, their social relations. They cannot have actual new experiences. They're stuck in the now and can't escape the repetition. And finally, the experience of long-term physical suffering is also shared between long COVID patients and non-human animals in industrial farming. It's important to note that most animals in industrial farming are ill or disabled through human actions, through breeding processes, but also the conditions in which they are held. And they cannot take care of their own basic needs, nor those of others. One small example is that when I began to get better, I noticed what a relief it was to be able to shower again when I wanted to shower, or to clean my house. And it felt like a very deep need to be able to clean yourself and your surroundings. Other animals are obviously denied this in the barns, but mice in laboratories, for example, are also denied making toilets in their houses. So the final set of connections that I want to very briefly point out concerns political voice. I've written extensively about animal political voice, for example, about the silencing of other animals in the political and scientific discourse. And I see many parallels between the position of long COVID patients and other post-acute infectious syndrome patients and more than human animals in this regard. Because these humans and non-humans obviously have voices and express themselves, but they often cannot do so in ways that are effective in political and social discourse. Their voices are not listened to, they're not recognized as the most important speakers when it comes to their own lives. And this is only getting worse in current political and social discourse. In the Netherlands, we went from the right of the richest by means of the VVD to the right of the loudest now in the case of the PVV. So this means that in order to be heard, long COVID patients and more than human animals need to be represented by others on the basis of speaking with them. And this means that we need to search for new ways of doing politics, new ways of doing advocacy based on listening. This is a very long story that I won't go into now, but I think that we will return to it next week when we discuss listening to the voices of those who are very ill in the discourse about long COVID. So these new ways of doing politics lead me to the conclusion of this talk. Very often, advocacy for marginalized humans or more than human groups is aimed at recognition. I see this in the long COVID discourse as well. Take us seriously, give us the care that we have a right to, and so on. But this very brief exploration of the multi-species elements of long COVID shows that this is not enough. We also need to zoom out and zoom in. We need to zoom out to see the larger political structures that make humans and other animals ill. We need to rethink how we in our societies deal with those who are vulnerable, which is ultimately, of course, everybody. At the same time, we need to zoom in to become attentive to the differences that exist between different bodies, to the needs and of many different beings and interdependencies as a basis for new forms of multi-species care. In this process, we can also learn from other Earth beings. Many patients live with non-human beings like dogs and cats, for example, who are often their lifelines. I also found it easier to interact with my animal companions than with human friends. It's hard to bear humans with long COVID, I found. And I want to specifically credit Doris here, who's a dog who was my main protector and caregiver when I was ill. And I mostly spoke about animal kinds of being now, but the experience of long COVID also moved me much closer to the plant world. When I was at my worst, I definitely felt vegetal rather than animal. And on the long days on the couch, I looked at the trees in my garden and the house plants on the windowsill for guidance. So I also want to thank these beings here. Of course, healing of human and non-human animal bodies is often not possible, and this is also what the chronic diseases that we're discussing today show. There will also be more zoonoses, new ones, new parasites, new outbreaks of parasites, and new illnesses due to the climate crisis and human decisions. But even though healing is not possible, there are more just and caring ways of living with others. And I hope that our conversation today will contribute to thinking about these. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Eva, for those insightful and very personal reflections. Now joining us is Christopher Sebastian, a journalist, technical writer, and an adjunct lecturer of media studies at Anglo-American University in Prague. Christopher's work covers a wide range of topics from food politics and social media to pop culture and animals. Christopher, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you, Ava, for going first. My presentation isn't really a presentation so much as a collection of jumbled thoughts, because I didn't formally prepare remarks for this, but I wanted to speak to my experiences of being an animal advocate and a person who also advocates for COVID. Well, not for COVID, because I don't advocate for the virus itself, but rather for people who are COVID cautious or COVID conscious. And like I just wanted to start with like the fundamental question of why do I wear a mask? And there are a couple of reasons why I want to start there. It seems like a very innocent question because I mask everywhere that I go, and so few people actually do that right now. Although there was a time during 2020 and 2021 when most people did. And I never know how to answer that question because it feels like there is an intense pressure to get that question right. Because it's not just answering it, it is in many ways a form of advocacy as well. Because you aren't just like expressing your true, honest thoughts, you're also hoping on some level to model this behavior for other people as well, so that they would want to equally participate in it. And I'm not always successful at doing that. Like I kind of have like a 50-50 success rate. So if you were looking for the answer to that question, I don't exactly have it. I'm still workshopping it. But one of the things that I realized is that it actually has a lot of commonality with my animal advocacy because independently of me trying to advocate just my existence in this world as a vegan person, it elicits questions from other people. I can be grocery shopping, I can be eating at a restaurant, I could be minding my business. And the question of why are you vegan actually comes up pretty frequently with people as well. And I haven't figured out the answer to that question yet either. Like I haven't figured out what to tell people that would be a compelling enough answer for them. And likewise, not an off-putting answer, because we also realize that in a world that like centers the human experience, that centers human exceptionalism, that centers like, like able bodies as the default, people who deviate from this are looked at as different. We're othered in some capacity. And so like irrespective of how good or bad my answers are to these respective questions, like like there's sometimes going to be some resistance, there's sometimes going to be accusations of virtue signaling or moralizing something that I think of as very basic, because in my head I think to myself, okay, I have learned about the horrors, the environmental degradation that is involved in animal agriculture, and then it makes sense for me to abstain from those practices as best I can. And other people didn't reach that same conclusion. Likewise, when I am like, when I realize that like, the dangers that we're in an ongoing pandemic, according to the WHO, that like we should all be taking individuals and societal measures to protect ourselves from this virus that has the capacity to disable us, especially through repeat continued infections. And again, not everybody got that same memo. So it's a very confusing place to be in. But at the same time, I'm actually really glad that I'm vegan, because that kind of set the stage for me to be able to talk about COVID in a more meaningful way with other people, and to like, and it prepared me for the experiences that I would have in COVID advocacy, which was completely against my will. Like, I didn't wake up one day and say, this is something that I want to do. I'm literally fighting for my life and for the lives of other people who are experiencing COVID, long COVID symptoms, and like, and wanting to minimize infections. And so it wasn't like, it wasn't an active choice that I made. It's just like, okay, I woke up one day and now I have to be a part of this fight as well. In addition to the fight against queer antagonism, in addition to the fight against like anti-Blackness, in addition to the fight against American imperialism, just like all of these things seem to stack up and cascade on each other in ways that I had never had anticipated. But yeah, like veganism in many ways built a type of resilience in me that prepared me to have these conversations. And so today I wanted to make two really important points really quickly, because I've already wasted half my time because I'm nervous and I ramble. But number one, because my background is in media literacy and in media studies, I wanted to talk about COVID and animal advocacy through that lens, particularly through the lens of bias. Because like in the media, it's easy to manufacture consent for certain behaviors in society when society already wants to engage in those behaviors. And what do I mean by that? Number one, talking about COVID, everyone immediately wanted to get back to quote normal, while ignoring the fact that normal actually was never great. Normal wasn't great. That wasn't something that we should have aspired to. The way that we live in our society, particularly Western society, not great. It is already environmentally destructive and causes us a lot of social, psychological, like ecological problems that we should be addressing. But everybody wanted to get back to that. And so as soon as our like all of our institutions in society had said, yep, this is over, we're done with that, we can throw away the masks now, everyone, or many people, I shouldn't say everyone, got vaccinated that first time, and we can just put this behind us, we'll close the book on that. Meanwhile, that's more of a psychological desire than a scientific or medical reality. Because the reality is the COVID is still with us, and it's by no means under control. All of the scientific evidence like says that's what we're dealing with right now. But society actually wanted to get back that, because we hadn't unpacked our grief, we hadn't unpacked our trauma around like the collective experience of most of 2020. And as such, like because of economic constraints, economic reasons, and like and reasons of domination, the overculture wanted us to get back to normal, which is like their functions of capitalism. And I won't get into all of that right now because we definitely don't have the time to talk about capitalism. But yeah, like, so it was easy to elicit those feelings in people of quote getting back to normal. And the institution of media in particular was complicit in that, and is ongoing, like experiencing complicity in that. And so like it's really important for us to separate like information from spin. Like looking at what is the information that's contained in news articles versus the type of spin, the type of biases, the type of prejudices that are being introduced into like articles that are written. And if I did prepare a presentation, there is an entire folder of headlines of news articles that like are in many ways not just presenting spin, but contain themselves like like a lot of misinformation and disinformation that is being perpetuated by people who are part of like the media class in our society. And it's incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous because it keeps us in this cycle of violence to ourselves and to one another. And like, what does this mean for animals? Well, the same thing has been going on for the better part of a century. Like, we have been living in a sea of disinformation about what animal agriculture does. Every time like I turn on the television, I see people consuming like absolute liters of milk and talking about the virtues of animal agriculture for like our environment, and like and using animals in like in ways that are just like unconscionable, and causing incalculable damage. But what do I hear people saying? oh, like milk is totally healthy for you. Cows just magically make milk themselves. And like, like just like animal agriculture is necessary, especially on an industrial scale, in order for us to survive and thrive. We need meat. And no, the reality is that like none of these things are true. What we need is protein. Cows by no means like make milk because that's just what they do by virtue of being cows. It's because they're farmed to do so. And what we're looking at is decades upon decades of misinformation campaigns that have taught us otherwise, and convinced us otherwise, because these were behaviors that we already wanted to engage in anyway. And so like we're combating that. We're combating like information disorder, conspiracy theories, like organized campaigns that have been going on for absolute decades. And that's difficult. But again, I am prepared for that fight in COVID because of all of the like of all of the years that I put into animal advocacy, doing exactly the same thing. So it's not as intimidating to me as it otherwise could have been. But I know that a lot of people are not prepared for that because we all were just of one accord at one point. And COVID kind of like made them rethink their priorities and rethink their understanding and relationship with media in general and the institutions that run our society. And for them, it was happening for the first time. The second point that I wanted to talk about was the shocking realization that a lot of people who were in the animal advocacy fight with me did not actually reach the same conclusions that I did about COVID. Why? Because they also are part of the overculture that values, quote, getting back to normal. And so I found myself in a space where a lot of people wanted to rip off the masks and like, engage in COVID denialism because that felt safe. And they really didn't want to add that extra battle onto the things that they were already doing, which is completely understandable. But like, but in my opinion, contrary to like, to having real conversations about animal liberation or total liberation. And that's hard. That's hard because now I found myself like being othered and minoritized and isolated and alienated in yet another way in communities that I have been part of for the better part of a decade. But nonetheless, those communities still exist. People who understand the intersections, people who understand the intersections between like ableism and COVID and animal advocacy and animal liberation. And I definitely encourage people to seek out those communities in online spaces or physical communities where you are able to get together wearing masks in well-ventilated spaces, and talk about these things in a meaningful way and push for change in our internal communities, and just like and grapple with the internalized ableism that is like that's present in animal advocacy spaces and the and the human exceptionalism that pervades like ableist or ableism communities. So yeah, but to wrap up, I just wanted to talk about that the fact that like despite all of these things, I actually am not discouraged. I think that there is an intern like a great capacity for us to expand our circle of compassion, our circle of empathy. And I don't think that that's gone. Like I don't think that that's wasted. I don't want to give into the cynicism of looking at the moment, because I'm so close to it right now, and thinking that like the we have to give up on this or that like this is a hopeless situation because it's not. And I think that the more that we understand that like we experience this planet together, there's one health. And we can't decouple ourselves as humans from the health and well-being of other animals with whom we share this planet. And I think that there is an opportunity for people to have that realization. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Christopher, for those thought-provoking insights, especially the reminder that the normal wasn't so great to begin with, and the role of bias in shaping what we accept, even within the vegan communities. Now, we still have maybe 20, 15 minutes left, and now we'd love to hear from everyone here. And let's open up the floor for the questions. Oh, sorry. I think, are you, Ava and Christopher, do you have any thoughts on each other's reflection? Let's hear from you first.
I will definitely say something. Like Ava's entire like presentation, her speech was amazing. One of the things that really stood out to me was when like coming up close to the end when Ava referred to, and this was really emotional for me, like it was triggering in a positive way, referred to her dog, her companion animal, as a caregiver, as a primary caregiver. And we're not used to thinking of animals in that way because we're conditioned to think of animals as like, some persons to whom we're giving care. And in that moment of isolation, just like, like that clicked for me because I've experienced that same isolation and alienation myself, like, as being a solitary person who like doesn't interact with people and have so much human interaction anymore because that's denied to me by like, by spaces being very hostile and unfriendly to call COVID cautious people. And and understanding that, oh, I have this amazing dog who's just sleeping right beside me over here. I don't know if you can see him. He's 14 years old, and he's carried me for these past 4 or 5 years in ways that I literally cannot describe. And animals as caregivers is such an important and vital point that so many of us, including myself, overlook. And just like, hearing that expressed and articulated in words was really, really meaningful for me. And for that, I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Yeah, I also had, when I got ill, my dog companion Ollie was also alive, and he was quite sick at that time. But I think that he stayed alive to assist me. And then when he died, of course, I got worse. I was getting better, but then he died, and I got worse, which happens a lot in ME with big emotions, because you can't feel emotions, and you can't cry. This also makes you more sick. So. But from Ollie, I learned that a certain way of dealing with illness and life and sort of hanging on, and he was very good at taking life as it comes and staying cheerful and looking at the small meaningful things that we encounter, even though we are not feeling well. So yeah, Ollie was also a part of it, but Doris was definitely the person who was next to me all the time, and still, because I think that our relationship deepened after this experience. And yeah, so that was important. But then also the plants, looking at how to enjoy life without moving. This also gave me a new perspective on our vegetal co-beings, but this is maybe a bit outside of our theme today. So thank you for saying that, because it's for me it's very important, and I find that a lot of patient advocates that I know through online connections, they are also very dependent on their companion animals for social interaction, because humans are just really loud. They have a lot of information. So in your when your brain is not working, it's hard. But Christopher, I wanted to thank you for everything you said, actually, and you articulated some things that I have been thinking about, sort of in the back of my mind, but not so clearly. And you mentioned them, so it's so that's great. But also for the fact that you take on board this issue, where not many animal advocates that I know do. It's very strange, because I'm very active in activism in different ways, and these communities were just not hearing it, or and still there's, I mean, from the different animal advocacy organizations and animal rights organizations that I'm involved with, I heard nothing about long COVID, or not so much about COVID, nearly nothing. So it's I'm very glad that some people are connecting the dots and educating others also about this. So thanks a lot for that. And that's
So now we'd love to hear from everyone. Let's open the floor for questions. I think you can just raise your, yeah, Christopher, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just saying that like I see that like one person left a comment in the chat box talking about like the huge cascade of denialism. And I don't know if it is regarding like animal agriculture and animal exploitation or regarding COVID. But I will address it like insofar as COVID because holy smokes, I was not prepared for the amount of denialism that people would engage in and the lengths that we would go to shut down like any conversations about the like about the medical and scientific reality that we're currently living in. So like it's very, very difficult, and that denialism is so real, and it manifests in a number of ways.
And
Yeah, thank you. I really agree with this. And it's tied to the denialism, ableism in general, and all those topics. But to me, just from an ethical perspective, we should not have gone back to society as it was before and stop all the lockdowns, as long as there are still people who are continuing to get long COVID. That's not even to mention all the people who get very sick and die, but long COVID is still a huge problem as well. So how can we open up society and just leave these people to rot, essentially? And this even happens now with long COVID clinics, which are supposed to start. You see the denialism in the fact that a lot of people say, oh, okay, now we have these clinics, everything will be better. And I'm sure a lot of people suffering from long COVID get these news messages from friends and family, hey, there are long COVID clinics now. But I read one critical comment saying that maybe 1% of long COVID patients in the Netherlands will even be able to access that care. So it's the suggestion that it's a solution when in reality it's just too little, too late. And
yeah, and it's even less than 1% because it's 1,000 people who can go to these clinics, while there are 100,000 people who have severe forms of long COVID, but it's 450,000 people who have milder forms of long COVID. So it's really a tiny minority, and it's also problematic. Yeah. It's just for long COVID patients and not for ME patients and other folks suffering from related conditions. And what's also very problematic is that they will do their own research and then come up with guidelines for doctors in a couple of years, which means that they just deny that there's so much research already done internationally, which is very easy to access because we as patients all have access to that and are trying out different meds. So it's a druppel op een gloeiende plaat, as we say in Dutch.
They've basically given all doctors a reason to say, well, I'm sorry, we don't have to do anything now, but wait a few years and then maybe we can help you.
Yeah.
Or you should go to the clinic now because there's a specialized place for that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's no use to anyone or most people. Yeah.
It's also alarming the number of people who think that the population of us who like have long COVID or experience long COVID is static. Because of course the pandemic is quote over, and so therefore there are not new people being added to that number every day, because as more and more people experience repeat infection, the risk of long COVID increases, and those numbers are going to increase and have catastrophic consequences for everything from like from the basic economy to the like to society altogether, and our ability to function, and I don't think that anyone is planning in the long term for that, or like not so far as I've observed, because then it would also have to by default reveal the fact that COVID is ongoing and not something that's in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, and actually there are some studies in the Netherlands showing that young people have a higher chance of getting long COVID now. So 5% of the young people, I think under 25, but I'm not entirely sure, have a chance of getting long COVID after an infection. And for the rest of the humans, it's 3%. So there's really, and it's a really high percentage. It's yeah.
Yeah.
We have one question from Beryl, who has to leave in 5 minutes. I don't know
Okay.
if you guys seen it in the chat. Uh, they're wondering how you think about the increase of keeping pets during the pandemic, seeing in the light of the discussion of intersection of human-animal illness. Would you like to go first, Eva? And
Yeah.
then Christopher can also chime in.
Yeah, I know that there was a huge amount of rabbits being dumped in 2022 because a lot of people adopted rabbits in the Netherlands during the in 2020, and then after some time dumped them. There are many problems with dogs with behavioral issues, and yeah, that's also an example of consumer society that a lot of humans are caught up in. They're not taking these companions seriously, and basically just repeat anthropocentric ways of being. At the same time, as we just discussed, Christopher and I both had a yeah, very meaningful relationship with our companions. So, I mean, perhaps the experience can also make humans more attuned to living with non-human companion beings. But I think in general, we shouldn't hold animals captive, and so that the whole industry is very flawed and problematic. So there's a deeper discussion to be had here about holding animals in captivity. I also thought a lot when I was so sick and couldn't go out about the guinea pigs and rabbits and other rodents that are kept in cages for children, that's very popular in the Netherlands. And they just spend their lives in isolation. And I think that humans often assume that isolation gets lighter with time because you sort of get used to your limited space, but it gets worse in my experience. So the lack of social interaction and also the lack of movement, just the experience of not being able to experience anything gets worse. And I don't know if that's the same for other animals, but at least it's a perspective that I want to share in this. Oh, the transmission, Vero was asking about the transmission of diseases. I think that's in terms of COVID and companion animals, very small, what I've read in terms of research. There's maybe one dog and one cat are got COVID through humans. So
In the US, there has been some research into like companion animals getting COVID. And yes, like the possibility of transmission does exist. It is small, but like it has happened. And apparently, according to research from the CDC in 2022, dogs can and do experience long COVID. There are neurological symptoms, none of which I can remember right now off the top of my head. But although the risk is small, it's not zero. And the idea of like, of bringing home a virus and giving it to my animal companion who doesn't have any control over his environment and what I do whatsoever. It absolutely horrifies me because he didn't ask for that. I also know that like populations of white-tailed deer in the United States, also from the Centers for Disease Control, and like that has been documented. The effects of COVID on white-tailed deer have been minimal, so they don't, to my knowledge right now, they don't experience like severe illness from it. And I don't know about like any other free living animals instead of animal companions like having COVID or experiencing long COVID. But those were the two things that I would be able to speak to. And so like yeah, I don't want to take that risk for myself or for the persons that I love of any species. And that is very real. So thanks for that question.
Let's see if there's any other questions or any comments or just reflections on the dialogues.
There's a comment in the chat about the connection between COVID being a zoonosis and the need to change our relationship to other animals and the exploitation of animals in popular culture. I think in the Netherlands, I'm not sure, and I think also beyond that, I think that in 2020 there was some attention for it. There was some in the Netherlands, mainly due to the Party for the Animals, who were speaking about this a lot. But this sort of soon withered away. And I think that's, Christopher explained this very eloquently about this return to normal that most humans desired, even though the normal is awful. But yeah, Christopher, you might have a better view on this phenomenon.
I can't say that it's a better view, but I do have a view, and it's not good. I have frequently said about the animal rights, animal welfare, animal protection communities, especially the professionalized spaces that I have observed in the US, the UK, and other places throughout the global West, Germany as well. Those communities dropped the ball. They dropped the ball because, as Ava said, in 2020, there was, in my opinion, lip service paid to the recognition of zoochosis. It seemed like a word that a lot of people were able to grasp onto. And instead of helping people to understand these connections, there was a lot more cynical engagement around the advocacy that was going on at the time. It felt like zoonosis and zoonotic diseases were weaponized in a way to to speak pejoratively about the popular culture. And and instead of actually like a recognition that this is an opportunity for animal liberation communities and and human liberation communities to find commonality, it felt like it was used to drive a deeper wedge. And these things were driven by our attitudes about other humans, a lot of misanthropy, a lot of racism, and in particular xenophobia. Like I witnessed so much anti-Asian hate during the early days of 2020 that I was prompted to write about it myself because I monitor a lot of social media communities and just conducting very minor, very individualized sentiment analysis of social media posts and comment sections and seeing a lot of people like locating blame on particularly Asian communities for what is such a common practice. Like anytime that you are abusing animals, keeping them together under unbearable, indescribable conditions, you're going to end up with some level of like animal to human disease transmission. And we've been very fortunate over the past century in minimizing that. But let's not also pretend that COVID is the first thing that came along. We have had over the past 25 years, swine flu. We've had mad cow disease. We have had monkeypox. H5N1 is a current conversation, and we're doing a terrible job of advocating for animals because we don't want to confront the overculture in a way that's going to be uncomfortable for them. And in some cases, in talking about the professionalized community, without being demonetized, because so many of the decisions about what we advocate for and how we advocate are driven by financial decisions and relationships with donors. So yeah, like that's like I said, it wasn't a fun answer, it wasn't a great answer, but it was an answer. And I don't know if that is like I see more comments in the comment section saying, oh yes, anti-Asian sentiment was huge. I used to work at RIBM about 10 years ago, and I know they were already very concerned back then about the spread of zoonoses and future health risks for the population, but unfortunately they never really managed to influence policymakers. And so yeah, like when I say the overculture is vehemently against this, they absolutely are. And like it is a huge challenge for all of us. And I hope that we have these conversations in more responsible ways in the future.
Jin, is there something that you want to perhaps add to this, perhaps from your own experience, but especially as a researcher studying animals from the COVID angle?
Yeah, I mean, especially the last question about zoonosis and making connections between animal health and human health and planetary health in general. I also don't have an answer. I also only have rent. With my experience, doing field work in China, especially talking to farmers, breeders of wild animals, firsthand. And I've been to the Huanan market, the ground zero of COVID. Well, they're not being called the new Huanan market, so they relocated to somewhere else. But when I talk to the traders and farmers and breeders, yeah, it becomes very clear, just like Christopher has said, COVID has become weaponized, and in China, it's become very politicized. I would go so far to say like almost 99% of the farmers that I talk to, they don't recognize this connection at all. They actively refuse there is this connection. And I cannot really persuade them. I cannot convince them because they have they have firsthand like experiential knowledge with dealing with these animals in a very intimate ways. And then for me to say that, oh, there is a connection, like you have to be aware of, the potential risks for zoonosis, for zoonotic outbreak, they're very difficult to be convinced because they think, well, if there is zoonosis, I will get infected, right? Why am I still alive? Why am still okay? So it's very difficult for me, like being in my position, to sort of, judge or comment on this thing. I'm still thinking about, like with my research in what maybe other ways that we can think about how to reshape human-animal relations, because the current trend that I see in China with COVID being so politicized, with animal rights being so contentious, we have to think about maybe there are ways that can accidentally change this problem. Say, for example, restrict or minimize refrigerators or something to make sure that the animal agriculture industry is not able to grow and further expand. I don't know. There are maybe other approaches that I'm also trying to explore. Yeah, that's not a satisfying answer either.
No, but it does show the scope of the problem, right? Yeah.
Yeah, how globalized and politicized it has become. At least in China, most people do think that the virus doesn't come from animals. But you have all heard about the lab leak hypothesis. So that's very much the thing. Yeah, okay. Well, I guess we're coming to an end. And thank you all for joining us today, and especially special thanks to Eva and Christopher for sharing your insights on multi-species health and justice. I hope today's discussion has inspired us to keep exploring new ways to create a more just and caring world for all species. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you at future sessions.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
Thank you.